When Saul and all Israel heard the words of that giant speaking to them, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And so David was sent on his way to go bring lunch to his brothers. And while he's there, he hears the giant tormenting and vexing and criticizing God's people. And so David responds. Something comes over him. The same anointing that came on him when he played a harp, the same anointing that came on him when he killed a lion and a bear with his few sheep out there, it's on him. And I believe there's a gift of faith that came upon him, because in the natural, you don't attack a lion, you don't attack a bear. I don't care how much adrenaline you got or how loyal you are. These are not natural qualifications. These are supernatural. A gift of faith will give you the confidence to do what in the natural you'd never do. And so this faith was on him. And so he basically comes out and he tells that giant, after he gets permission from Saul to take him on, he tells the giant that he is that day going to die. And David takes that, the story with the slingshot, bam, the forehead of that giant. But what most people miss is that didn't kill the giant. What killed the giant was his own sword. David goes up and takes the giant's sword and cuts his head off with his own sword. And so the giant is beheaded, David is promoted, and now David starts to experience the favor backlash. And that's all part of your training. The favor backlash is in the period of crisis, God will promote you. Right now there's crisis in America. Right now there's crisis in the world. You should be looking at the crisis and going, oh my God, your anointing is actually going to expand under pressure, and your favor is going to operate during the crisis. David gets promoted. And now David has to deal with the jealousies and competition of other people. This is a different kind of battle, and everybody's going to have to go through this. It's going to make a difference on planet Earth. But what happens for David is that he ends up having to take off from Saul's house. He has to depart, and he's in the wilderness. And I'm going to come back in a moment and share with you where the anointing is wanting to take you in the plan of God right now. And we'll be right back and talk about it.
Favor is the most powerful force in the universe. During a period of chaos, you want to have favor attracting you to the right people and the right divine appointments.
You know, I'm reading about the destiny of Esther and Daniel in this God's Chaos Code, because literally they are compatible with the period of time we're in right now, which is a time of government instability. But it was the force of favor that attracted both of them to their ultimate assignment. And I want you to know something. No matter what goes on in the world around you, the chaos is understandable, and the force of favor is irresistible. Put these two together and you'll prosper.
Today, for your gift of any amount, you'll receive Lance's latest book, God's Chaos Code, and the best-selling CD series, Favor, Covered in God's Presence. It's time for you to tap into your ultimate assignment. Contact us now at lancewallnau.tv/favor or call 877-317-4776.
So let's talk about what happens. What I'm trying to say is, in the cycle of the awakening that God is doing, even in America right now, there is a recognition that is coming upon those who are anointed for this moment and called in this moment. And that favor is going to position you into a place where you're going to have this stickiness factor. And that stickiness factor is, years ago, the Lord told me that favor is like the honey of heaven. This is supposed to be honey. I don't know if people know what that is. Honey comes down. You know, when you get honey in your hands or something, everything sticks to you. And when you got the favor of God, you make an impression that can't lift. And it's a positive impression. It's a God impression. It's something where people, they have to have you. It's how the Lord actually lets the favor of the anointing on you promote you to people that are indispensable to your future. I want to give you a definition of favor right now that I got downloaded to me once when I was in British Columbia up at Wesley and Stacey Campbell's church, great revival church up in Canada. The Lord spoke to me. I remember it was at lunch. I just kind of got this strange download, like a Webster definition from heaven. Favor, remember, David's on the hillside playing and singing, and the Lord is looking for who he's going to replace Saul with. And he has raised up for himself a king. He was drawn to David. Something in David drew God's attention. What was it? David's devotion, David's singular affection and attraction to God. And so David's worship of God drew the attention of God to David. And as David worshiped, favor began to operate. Here's what favor is. Favor is the attraction of God to you that releases an influence through you so that other people are inclined to like you or trust you or cooperate with you in the assignment that God gave you. In the assignment that God gave you. The ultimate power of favor isn't to find a parking lot at Christmas time. I remember friends of mine would always be confessing favor so they could get parking spots. I always thought that, well, that's great, and even I did that when I was a young believer, but the ultimate purpose of favor is to open the door to you for your assignment. And your job is to be ready for your assignment. God's job is to promote you and open the door. Make sense? All right, so here we go. David is now fleeing from Saul because Saul sees competition. And he departs and he goes in chapter 22 of 1 Samuel. David departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. I love King James. And everyone that was distressed and in debt and was discontented gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain. Isn't it interesting that the man who's called to be king and has an anointing over Goliath starts off as a captain? What does that tell you? God doesn't start you off in your prophetic fulfillment where you're ultimately going to be. He doesn't take you all the way to the top. He takes you gradually and progressively into the role of your ultimate assignment. And so David is a captain, not a king. And worse yet, he's attracting to him all the dysfunctionals. But what's amazing is the anointing on David has got all the mighty men. When you read about, and this man slew 20, and this man slew 30, and this man, they're the dysfunctional. And when they come into David's cave under the anointing, they end up becoming the mighty men. What does that suggest to you? Jesus, who David is a type for Jesus, and the disciples are a fascinating study of the dysfunctional, because here they are. They're not extraordinary, learned first. They weren't the first cut for the clergy, because every rabbi already had picked the best students. These guys were the working class people or the tax collector who nobody saw them as anything special, but Jesus saw them. Remember, God looks upon the heart and not upon the outside. And when Jesus looked at them, the Father said, there you go, that's your church. And so you could say that when they hung around with Jesus in the cave of Adullam, the distressed, the dysfunctional, the leper, the blind, those that were rejected by the religious system, they became the first fruits of the Messiah's movement, and they became the upper room people that came out with the power of God. This cave of Adullam is when the anointing of God that's on you gets on other people around you, and God begins to change them. They became the mighty men. Now, David takes off. I want you to go somewhere with me. This is so important because we talk about the anointing of recognition, and so many of you need this recognition. I don't know what to do. I got 2 minutes left in this segment here. I'm going to take you over to 1 Samuel chapter 16. We already did that. So Samuel's anointed David, and David's got the supernatural anointing. Everything he needs to do the will of God is on him already. And so he's getting stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul is getting weaker and weaker. Chapter 3 of 2 Samuel says, now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David waxed stronger and stronger. And the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. And then David started having sons. He started having a family. And finally the time came for the kingdom to be transferred from Saul to David. And watch this. This is really important. 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 4. The men of Judah came to a place called Hebron, and they anointed David king over the house of Judah. I remember the first time I heard this by a great preacher up in Long Island, New York, named Tony D'Onofrio, Bishop Tony. And he was talking about the woman with the alabaster vial that anointed Jesus' feet with his cost. It was a whole year's income. And Jesus said that what she's done is such a precious sacrifice that everywhere the gospel is preached, she will be mentioned. In other words, she had anointed him, and he in turn gave her global recognition. So you see, part of the secret of the anointing on your life is recognizing who and what God has anointed and sowing into them. This may sound counterproductive. Everybody wants gimme, gimme, gimme. But the reality is, if you can discern the activity of God and sow into it, you have now recognized God's anointing and something comes back on you. When you recognize a message or a word that comes from God and you sow into it, it boomerangs back into a recognition of something in your life. You can't sow recognition of what God is doing through a vessel without God blessing you in return. That's why you never speak bad about any ministry that you're receiving blessing from, because the anointing is connecting you to something in that relationship. But what happens here is the men of Judah anoint David king. But I just got done saying he was anointed by Samuel, so he doesn't need another anointing. He doesn't need their anointing. He's already got God's anointing. Aha! He needed the anointing of them recognizing his anointing. David needed the anointing of recognition. And the anointing of recognition is when they saw who he was and got in alignment with it. We'll be back in a moment, and I'll show you how to release this in your own life. When we wrote about Esther and Joseph, it never occurred to me in this book that what attracted them to their destiny in the middle of chaos was the power of God's supernatural favor. That's the combination you want to look for right now.
Today, for your gift of any amount, you'll receive Lance's latest book, God's Chaos Code, and the best-selling CD series, Favor, Covered in God's Presence. Contact us now at lancewallnau.tv/favor or call the number on the screen.
And so here we come to the crescendo of what I want to share with you about the anointing of recognition and how during a period of contradiction and turbulence, what you're anointed to do actually comes to the surface. I remember Rick Renner years ago talking about he's a great Bible teacher, and authority like on Greek and Hebrew. And he talked about how we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers, from Ephesians, great quote. And he said, but the wrestlers in ancient Greece, and this was how it was practiced in Rome also, they would be, before a wrestling match, they would be massaged. And they would massage with oils and oils and oils, and they'd be layering and layering and layering all these oils. And the reason why was because when they went into the wrestling match, as they worked up a sweat, the sweat mingled with the oils and made a lather so that it was hard for your opponent to wrestle